It's part 2 of the appendicular skeleton, and it's the upper extremity. We just finished with the humerus, and we're about to see how things articulate or form joints with the humerus right here. Okay, so what's this view? This view is the anterior view. Here again is the anterior view. Here is our medial epicondyle, right here. Here is that groove, that special groove for the ulnar nerve. Here are these two features here where we bump the top of the radius up against the capitulum, but we actually grab the trochlea with this part of the ulna, and it shows it right here. Do you see how it comes around this way? Okay, and we'll actually take a look at this feature right here. It's like a little grabby thing right there. Okay, so it's got a little C shape to it. It's got a curl. Okay, and it comes around from the front to the back. If you bend this right here, this is your elbow. This is referred to as the Olecranon process. So if you're leaning on your elbow, this is what you're leaning on. Okay, so good not to hit the ground with this, especially because it could have some injury to it. Notice that the radius right here is just sort of minding its own business almost. It's not really forming a heavy-duty joint here, but it is bumping, and in fact there is a joint surface right here. So that means there's synovial fluid between the bones right here. Right, so there's an actual joint, a movable joint, and it's quite extensive. This whole thing is one complete joint, just the way you like it. So all the way across here is a joint. Okay, just like that. So now here is the big view of the ulna right here. Notice that the ulna is more substantial at its proximal end at the elbow, a little bit more delicate out here at the wrist. Here the radius is a, how shall I say, more delicate at the proximal end at the elbow, and then much more substantial at the wrist. So I'm going to do something here that demonstrates why we have that name, and I'm just going to bring a piece of paper down, and I'm going to plant my this is called a Digity Minime right here, the small finger, the fifth finger, and then in line with the thumb. And bear in mind that on the thumb side we have the radius. The radius is hooked up on the thumb side. Okay, so if I plant my Digity Minime right there and I go like this, do you notice that I can form something like an arc or a portion of a circle? And the reason I can do that is that I can bring the pen down half from the middle of that arc, and that's referred to as a radius right there. That distance is a radius, and so we call the bone that makes that possible a radius. Okay, so this is the radius, and if you were to imagine a hand continuing down from there, you would have the Digity Minime, the fifth finger, coming down this way, and over on this side is you would have the thumb and the forefinger coming down this way. Okay, notice that these two bones are joined together by an interosseous membrane, spelled interosseous membrane. This is actually a joint. There's a joint right here as well. Look carefully. The head of the radius is going to spin, literally spin, right there. So that's what this does for a living, is that it spins. So when you go from this position, which is anatomical position, to this position, which is prone, so supine and prone, supinating, pronating, you're actually bringing the radius across the, well, we'll take a look at that when we come to joints, though. I just want to bring that to your attention, that this bone right here is swiveling, like that. Okay, so something to keep in mind. Here's the posterior view. We have this big portion of the radius down here that comes to form the wrist joint. Okay, so they give us a little side view here of how the Olecranon process comes around this way. This is the trochlear notch. Here is the coronoid process, similar to what the mandible has. Remember, the mandible also has a coronoid. And so this can swivel around, causing your elbow to flex and extend, when it's actually in this position right here. So here we have a little notch that's available here. This notch is for the Olecranon. We call it the Olecranon notch. Then up here we have a notch where the coronoid process can fit in, and that's referred to as the coronoid notch. Okay, so we can move across that space right there. That would be the ideal situation. Okay, then we get to the finally the hands, and we begin with the wrist joint. Notice that there's 8 bones here in the wrist joint, and that the radius comes down and it articulates with 2 right away, the radius. So the most proximal bones of your wrist here, these they're called carpal bones, there's 8 of them. They're going to be the scaphoid and the lunate. Okay, notice that we have a little space right there, and there's actually a hyaline cartilage disc that fits in there with a little, how shall I say, joint space on both sides of the disc. Okay, so this is not a very strong part of your wrist right there. Sometimes we pick up something that's heavier than we thought it was going to be, or somebody tosses something heavy for us to catch, and we do our best, but we end up actually sort of straining our wrist. This often happens too when you can't open one of those naughty bottle tops or jar lids, and you're struggling with twisting, and finally you get really sore right there. Okay, because you've torqued too hard on that spot. Okay, so what you'll notice here is that the ulna comes down to a fine point. We have a little stylus process right there, or styloid process. And so I'd like you to learn these names here. Associated with the thumb is going to be our friend trapezium. Thumb trapezium. Okay, now the thumb actually has the name pollex. We'll be learning that. It turns out that this finger right here, which is not the first finger, it's the second. This is the first finger, the thumb, or pollex. Second finger is going to be indicus. Okay, you indicate things with your indicus. Third finger, fourth finger, fifth finger is called Digity Minime. Okay, and the names of muscles reflect that because we have a flexor digiti minimi, right? We have a extensor indicus. We have a flexor and an extensor pollicis. Okay, so you need to learn these names. So with your, over here on the pollex side, we're going to be having the trapezium. The trapezium goes to this metatarsal here, metatarsal like that. Okay, and then the second finger and second metatarsal comes right here to the trapezoid, trapezium, trapezoid, and then we have something called capitate in the middle ground here. And then this next bone over here is big and actually occupies enough space to support 2 metacarpals, and it's called hamate. So trapezium, trapezoid, capitate, hamate. And then we have our scaphoid, lunate. And then we have kind of like a little pile up here. We have our trichotrum right here. And then we have our pisiform right here. Now what you can't tell necessarily from this view is that we're actually looking at the palm, palmar surface. This is an anterior view. It says right here, anterior. So if you look underneath your finger right there on that side, you'll see that you have something over here that you can palpate. Right over on this side over here where the digiti minimi comes down, and that palpable thing is called, that bump right there is called pisiform. Okay, then if we come over to the posterior view, we see the same things except from the posterior view. And so you can name those as you go along, and then we'll work on metacarpals next.